Welcome to Media Empires, where we sit down with the most influential media creators right now to learn exactly how they built their empires. Our aim is to extract the secrets of top-tier podcasters, newsletter authors, and media creators who are breaking the old rules for media success. Whether you're looking to start your own empire or simply curious about the nuts and bolts behind media businesses, you'll find valuable insights and tactics in each episode. Grab your headphones, let's dive in.
Hey all, today's episode is a little bit different. In the spirit of building in public, we're sharing a valuable brainstorm session with Anuj Abrol, a prolific media tech creator and former chief of staff to Justin Kahn, together with Sarah Wright, head of content at Product Hunt. In this conversation, we explore the podcast to newsletter pipeline and trade notes about how to build the best possible newsletter business that contains content people actually want to read. We also discuss various approaches and the balance between producing quality content and maintaining operational efficiency at scale.
Hello.
Hello.
I appreciate you guys coming on to brainstorm a bit. Anuj and I, a few weeks ago, maybe a bit longer, were kind of brainstorming different newsletter strategies. I was basically asking him, like, how would he think about it if he was CEO of Turpentine, given his vantage point? And we sort of batted it around a little bit, like the different styles of strategy. We could have like Sean Puri style, which I'll let Anuj get into in a bit. We could do more longer form. Anuj, do you want to sort of like recap what you remember of those conversations, or maybe start out by sort of answering the prompt, like how would you think about it if you were CEO of Turpentine, based on what you've seen us having to date?
Yeah, I think we looked at it a couple angles, and I know we were just riffing in there, so we didn't necessarily get to a complete, clear answer. But I think the really cool thing about Turpentine is you're getting naturally these experts, right, or people who are respected in the space to give you their time and give you their input. And I think the newsletter, we were then talking about like what we do from a newsletter, and I think there's a couple things you can do, but it's if you were thinking of if we were going to have the newsletter be independently a valuable product. And I know there's a couple different people approach newsletters in a bunch of different ways. And I think the simplest way is, can you largely do a regurgitation or a digestion of what was in the podcast? And that's like what 20VC is doing, when you look at their newsletter. And I think that's baseline. That's good. But I think in terms of like something that's lovable, and then even in itself, you can drive traffic to. And I know when you even think about naturally key man risk with Turpentine, I think what's really cool is if you can essentially make this newsletter the go-to hotspot or pulse of the industry or in that role that you're going for. So for example, Shampuri has this 5-Tweet Tuesday, and it's really cool in that he's giving you more so like the raw types of live things that he's digesting. And with Sean's, largely it might be, I mean, a lot of it's like funny and comedic, but I think what's pretty cool, we were talking about in the example of maybe you're doing one in, I think you were talking about maybe could I get someone it's a defense focused newsletter or something. And largely what's cool is there's a lot of information that these people are considering that hasn't been digested yet that they're maybe putting in their Slack. So could you have stuff that's like the unpolished veneer? And naturally, the people who are reading these newsletters are the folks who are on the edge anyway. So it's largely stuff that they're digesting and probably actually having discussions on, in their own, businesses or happy hours or whatever. So could you go to someone who's, I think you're using the example of Catherine, could I have her maybe you rotate it every single day, depending on how you want to do it. But maybe you have a list of 20 people who are in the space, and you just ask them once a month, hey, what's in your Slack, or what are you thinking about? And they can maybe just send you 5 links, or maybe even just go into their Twitter likes, who knows? And you just ask them to send a voice note about these are the things that I'm thinking about. I think that's really interesting because you're getting something that's a little bit more raw, but also naturally think about it's like, why is someone who's maybe in the Turpentine audience who's opening this newsletter, it's like, can I get a cutting edge type of, it's not necessarily even like an insight. Can I just understand what other people are also, weighing as they make up their own strategy or how they're leaving their own company?
That's really interesting. I want to share some new information news since the last time we spoke. We're kind of going deeper on this sort of book face style social network. And we've had some success with it on the founder level. Basically, we have founders at we have different group chats. One is founders at 1 million in revenue, founders at 10 million in revenue, or founders at 100 million in revenue. And so it's like people trust the curation because of the bar. And people share a lot. They share like what vendors they use, what investors they like. And I want to build an app for that also enables pseudonymity. I don't know, app is the right, but like something where you could get even more insights, because real name people are only going to share so much. But pseudonymity or anonymity within a curated subset. And we're doing it for founders, but we're going to start to do it for exec positions too, for these different demographics. And you could imagine like a newsletter that highlights, like VC Guide actually I think did this pretty well, where they got good gossip and good insights, and then I think they created a newsletter around like, here's the best things we got this week, and it was also advertising for this network. And I think what we're trying to create at Turpentine is this like insights company, right? And there's different formats that you could get insights that help guide investment decisions or purchasing decisions. One is a podcast, long form interview, and some people are going to share, they can go deeper in a long form interview, this kind of thing. Some people are motivated to do that. And then there's newsletters, of course, and newsletter could be its own independent analysis. It could be curation of, summary of the podcast, as you say. It could be, but then there's also sort of this group chat or this like social network that it could be summary of what you see there. We could use the group. We always wanted to do these lists, right? Of like, who are the best, AI investors or AI companies or AI products, but like for everything, right? And maybe group chats are a way to surface it. I think I've been surprised by how much people talk about in group chat format, but also how hard it is to get people to like fill out a survey, if that makes sense. And so in some ways I'm like, do we just meet people where they're at and then find a way to summarize from there? Anyways, not to throw a wrench in the covers, but I just wanted to add that in terms of like, that's another thing.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it seems like, well then, with this, when you're thinking about, is even newsletters necessarily the focus right now, or is it like actually maybe we can just spin up a group chat for X is probably the most immediate to go 1-0 on?
Well, both. So I think group chat for X is pretty easy, and that's something where we're doing it 100%. I think where the newsletter comes in is one is it's good advertising for the insights that we're getting, because most people can't participate in the group chat, but anyone can read the newsletter. Two is, we don't collect any emails for the podcasts, just because podcasts. So we need a way to collect email addresses, so any email remains supreme, and then also sponsors would love our
and that's the only way you can get like analytics or data to them, as well as even quantify if you're doing like performance type work.
It seems like potentially slightly different. When you think about the social network, is that more of a insiders talking to other insiders, and then the newsletter has more of a like kind of what we talked about, like aspiring C-suite, like learning how to be. So I think a lot of that is that there's probably some crossover for content or stuff that needs to be fleshed out. Like I said, it could be like what's in the Slack, almost like what's in your browser history, but like fleshing it out as well, like how they think about things. And there's just something more raw going on in the social media channel of
I mean that's actually probably even more engaging or effective, or even when we think before talking about like, can I have this roster of 20 people just share me their 5 interesting things? I think that's maybe what's cool if you're essentially pulling what you put in the newsletter from what's happening in the group chat. That does, I think, maybe a couple things. One, either gets people to want to then join the group chat because it's like, oh wow, look at all this like pretty sick stuff. And then two, naturally it's probably also less operationally intensive, because then you can just like, whoever's making the newsletter can just pull from the group chat rather than have to coordinate like, oh, can you give me this stuff, whatever, type of thing. The question is then like, how do you, and maybe you're already solving this, but as long as you make sure you have a steady flow within the group chat, you then, or whoever's writing it, can probably just take that and figure out what's an interesting angle to share in the newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned to Erik, like, it almost sort of reminds me of just how, I haven't done much ghostwriting or direct, like working with founders on translating that content, but it's just a lot of the similar thing. But using, we see a lot of it on Twitter, but just looking at it in other formats, like what's the long form version of it? What's the, practical version of it? How do we collate some of them to like across the different learnings from founders? If we're seeing like multiple threads across the same topic. So it's just like finding the storytelling.
What's the main way you would grow? Because I think the interesting thing maybe we talked about in the text was like if I, for example, went to this person and had them share me their 5 things, they'll probably tweet it out, and like at least once a month, if they have interesting distribution, they're going to get a repeat hit like, oh, cool, I hear my thoughts from and share them in the Turpentine newsletter. And that's somewhat of a growth mechanism. I mean, naturally these networks are probably they're finite anyway, so you'll get repeat exposure in there, and that could actually be pretty cool. I'm curious, what would growth look like if it's more so like, oh, here's this thing in the private group chat, and you're sort of maybe just hoping for an interesting insight to get picked up by someone else and shared type of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the most important questions. And I talked to Erik a little bit about just like distribution outside of, networking. I mean, one thing that we've just done a lot of is, I think, with those like list opportunities, is find places where there's just multiple like mentions or networks involved. If like at Product Time, we're doing a lot of focus on maker stacks. So it's that whole idea of like, what is a founder using? What are his 10 tools? Well, if you're doing a good job of like, those 10 tools, making sure that whoever is the founder of, Supabase is then realizing that this notable founder is also using Supabase and then retweeting that, then you have, just multiple branches of this type of content like being retweeted. So that kind of content should be like really easy. But yeah, I think that's
true. It actually could be like, it doesn't have to be either or. For example, say someone had this really interesting insight or something that they just shared in the group chat. You could always ask them like, hey, can I go longer form with you on this? And whether Erik decides to, let's hop on a podcast, or, you do, and just ask them some questions or whatever, you can still get them to share it. As long as it's whatever, something they're willing to attach their name to.
Yeah, I think potentially just facilitating more of like the team talking to one another too. So like something also I'm trying to work on is just like more panel is such a boring like word, but like the digital version of a panel. So like, give them one topic on X, and like, can we get that conversation going in a Google Doc? Like, where they see, one founder company, there's a piece I'm working on right now is like open source for X. So as like a market strategy right now. So really just like, copying a notable company market lead and being the open source version of it. So we're talking to different open source companies and trying that as like a open doc, right? Like, let's see what we all share in the same document on the same piece. There might be multiple different versions to try to like, get those stories, but that's one thing I'm working on right now.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
What's your goal with the newsletter? Is it primarily, let's just use it as a vehicle to collect emails, develop free cash flow, that type of thing, and it's more so just a way to sustain or like, help perpetuate what's being done with podcasts?
What are my options of goals? Like, what would other goals be?
I mean, it's like, why do you want to do it? Like, do you believe it's like the way that you think you can grow? Do you think it's more so just a way to, as a wedge to other things? Do you view it as a way to, just financially bring in more revenue?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm curious, like how you might, how do you view newsletters, or the purpose of newsletters in your opinion?
So part of it feels like table stakes for me. Like it feels like if you're like, you need direct access to your customers. Podcast, we don't, or to your, users, readers, listeners. Podcast doesn't, do that. Also, some people don't listen to things; they read things. So it feels like part of it is table stakes, and then similarly, our group chat thing that's only going to be private. Like, but we want to promote that it exists. The best way to, and so that the right people want to join it. And it'll be a social network at some point. So part of it feels like table stakes, marketing and monetization. But then also part of it, I don't know what I don't know. And I don't really know the newsletter business like exceptionally well, other than to say that I know that some people have built very meaningful businesses doing similar types of content to similar types of audiences that we're doing, like Industry Dive and like Morning Brew, and like, a bunch of others. And so I'm trying to get a sense for where we should play. I think the broader thing around Turpentine is like, hey, we have access to experts, and experts have expert information that's in their heads that's not on the internet, that is really valuable, that would inform investment decisions, that would inform purchasing decisions. And so we want to have formats that unlock the expertise that's in people's heads. We want to be able to market that, and we want to be able to get paid for that expertise, like distribute it and get paid for it. And it feels like newsletters has to be part of any strategy that has that. Though, what I don't know is it a supporting strategy, or should it be the main thing in a way that it is for these other businesses that I've mentioned.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey, everybody. If you don't already subscribe to the Media Empires newsletter, you should. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. The platform we use to power this and other Turpentine newsletters is called Beehiiv, and it's excellent. First of all, it was started by the same early team who helped build Morning Brew into a $75 million newsletter business. And they built Beehiiv to offer that same powerful functionality to anyone sending emails, from essayists to business owners. The platform is beautiful, their text editor is intuitive, and they help you scale your audience with custom growth features. Beehiiv has powerful tools to help you monetize your content. You can easily launch paid subscriptions or pursue an advertising model. The Beehiiv platform will even connect you to premium brands to sponsor your newsletter. Not only do we use them, but thousands of the top newsletters in the world also use them, like Milk Road, Blockworks, Newsletter Operator, and so many more. Beehiiv's founder hooked up Media Empires listeners with a sweet deal. Get 20% off for 3 months with code EMPIRES. Visit beehiiv.com, that's BEEHIIV.com, to get started. Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at erik@turpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.
Have you found, like, with people in your audience, do they consume everything, or is it more so they consume only probably like the most stuff that's interesting to them, or maybe they get the most like clout? Because I feel like actually what's interesting maybe in terms of podcasts, I understand that we're going with Turpentine, we're going after, specific intersections, in terms of whether it's a role or an industry, or maybe even a role in an industry. But what's interesting is I feel like there's now, there's always now, just like both with newsletters as well as with podcasts, there's now maybe a abundance of stuff to consume. It's more so now like, which stuff do you consume? At least that's what I feel in my own experience. So it's like, okay, for me, I lean into, then if we're going to make something, let's try and lean a little bit more into quality, so that it will stand out. Because I feel like just naturally, there's more time, there's more stuff that you can listen to than the time of the day. But if you're maybe what we're also learning with Turpentine, it's like actually there's with expert networks and information for their job, it's like literally their job. So it's like you're not just competing for the 30 minutes on their commute. It's like you have 10 hours a day, during the workday, that's sort of green space to fight for.
No, we're definitely competing. We're definitely competing and have to be in the quality business for sure.
Got it.
I think that's like the question of, can you do that with like a niche newsletter is maybe kind of a question. But I think, in the same way that you saw like a bigger community being built amongst like Lenny's podcast, I think that potentially you can see that with a newsletter as well, like, or what you're doing on the podcast side. Like if it's really high quality content, then, maybe it's not just the content itself as well, but sort of like the community engagement around it. And then, kind of two-faced.
And if you have access, like I was looking at Lenny's stuff, if you have access, you can actually recreate pretty much a lot of his content. Like it seems like what he does, he takes an interesting prompt that, either a lot of times is like how did I get my first X? So it's more so maybe geared to people who are at the beginning of their startup journey. But even in general, it's like just an interesting problem or question that people are gearing for. And I don't know how he actually goes about collecting that information, whether he just sends an email, whether he hops on a quick call, whatever. But I think this is something that Turpentine has the capability to do, and it's very, it's very interesting and engaging.
Yeah.
And you could probably repeat that ad nauseum for a bunch of different, at least if you think about product being a horizontal type of
Yeah, it's fascinating.
function.
So I just went through our list of group chats we've had over the past 6 months and basically screenshotted all the conversations I thought were really interesting. There may be like 40 of them. I'll share them to get a preview, but it's basically a mix of like, what do people think about X product? What do people think about X firm? What do people think about like this company building topic? It's kind of what you mentioned in News, the interesting prompts. And what we could do is, one, aggregate what people are already speaking about already, but then two, more formalize like, hey, we think people would be interested in this. Let's like get experts to contribute. I feel like if I had to guess, like that's probably going to do better than like a summary of podcasts. Basically, I think it's like juicy information, either juicy information or like stuff that's like directly going to impact what they do for a certain, like, here's what the best company used for payroll, and here's what, we interviewed them, and here's what they think about that. Here's what they use for XYZ. Here are the firms that they think are the best for this sector.
Yeah, I think we talked about like what makes loved content, and I think it's partially tapping into something that's like you're intrinsically curious about. And I think we talked about in the example of the industry dive is like, I don't necessarily view their content maybe they're sort of reporting on anything and everything, and it's like maybe it's like, oh, here's just the results from this company and what they said at their investor call or something like that. It's not, and it's a lot of it's like summarized information, but it doesn't necessarily help someone, or it doesn't necessarily tap into someone's like intrinsic curiosity, like, oh man, like what's the dirt on this type of situation, or maybe I'm really struggling with this thing. Can you just tell me how to do it, or can you give me inspiration of how other people did it more so? And I agree. I think that's the stuff that people search out, stuff people reference. Versus, I think like industry dive, it's like maybe I think they've just done a really good job in other areas of their business, and maybe not necessarily on like focusing on content that I personally find myself seeking out or using.
There's like, from a broad perspective, content, there's just multiple goals for it, like inspire, inform. B2B content is going to be like so much more informational. And so I think that's like also a big question to ask is like, a lot of it being inspirational, but like, is there, practical side of it as like we're approaching, each piece? I've agreed we can do better than summarized podcasts, but I listen to the podcast and I just feel like there's a lot of content to be mined there, like ideas that serves as like the base for fleshing out more of like that inspirational, practical content. If that's what we think, like the audience of these like expert wannabe expert people are interested in. Yeah, I mean, to me, like really making sure we know that if that's the audience that we're approaching, like what their goals are and the content that they want to like consume. For sure, like you said, that's not industry dive content. That's something different.
I've done a couple of exercises with myself, just recording myself go through my inbox, and naturally it'd be, I have like a separate inbox for, information and newsletters and all that stuff. And then, maybe for stuff with my team or, more professional emails I have to, pay attention to and respond. And I noticed that you sort of need a newsletter needs to hook me like within like, 0.7 seconds. Otherwise I'm just pressing it to archive. So I think maybe the interesting thing with what, and it's sort of the gist or like the insight around Turpentine is like these podcasts are just you're spinning off so much data, insights, types of things you can talk about. But it'll probably be, if you want to make a loved newsletter, you probably have to find like what is maybe out of all these different things, maybe what's just the one thing that we think people would want to open their inbox on. I think that similar game that like YouTube talks about. I mean, you hear any of these creators, it's like they repeat ad nauseum, like more than half the battle is just like title and thumbnail. And then naturally, like once you get people to click on your thing, yes, it needs to be engaging to retain, because these algorithms want to maximize the amount of time spent on their platform for revenue reasons and other reasons. But at least in Turpentine's case, it's cool. Can I get them to open based on the most interesting thing I can get in the title? And then, okay, maybe I can just get them to, people spend like maybe no more than, maybe they'll click off if they see an interesting article or something. But you're still spending like no more than 5-10 seconds anyway. So I think probably the art actually with a lot of newsletters now is, can you just figure out what's that most interesting thing I can get them to open each day?
Yeah, when I inherited the product hunt newsletters, really at least, even though they need a lot of work, it was just like the top up votes from the previous day. Like,
Mhm.
right, what were the top voted products? And I know that people are going to keep opening that. And then from there, it's like, let's keep on building. And I've seen that with other, like with Morning Brew, it's like, okay, it's going to be like the quick headlines or whatever it is. Like, what's the thing that keeps me coming back?
Yeah.
But one thing that you also just said that I loved potentially is like the whole idea of recording my inbox. I feel like just other people's responses too is something that doesn't get enough. Like, okay, we got this thought leader to share his opinions. Cool. Now, what do these other 5 thought leaders think about it? And being like quick, reply on those things. Just like kind of takedowns of other pieces, but like in like a really useful techno optimist way.
Or one person I've been studying a lot is like Cleo Abram, and I think with hers, she's always just done like, yes, there's a lot of ways where technology can go positively. There's a lot of ways technology can go negatively, and she's sort of just like focused on the positive stuff. And maybe I think that's partially just the brand she wants to, spin out. And I'm sure you could do something if you want something similar. I don't know. Maybe Turpentine is actually, these are the place where we don't, where we actually get to the real, and like probably having dissections or these things is actually probably very helpful to people because they're actually betting, their strategic decisions on it.
Yeah. I love Cleo Abrams stuff. And like in general, like a product hunt too, we take a very techno optimist. On a personal perspective, I'm always interested in like, how do you help people have better conversations in the gray areas?
And then when you think about like purchase decisions and investment decisions, you need to know these like red flags or like, the caution flags that you're getting into.
The Anuj, you were at one point working on a newsletter for CEOs, I believe. If you were starting that over, I think your analysis from it was that it was just a crowded space. Feel free to edit that. But if you were starting that again today, and like, what would need to be true for you to have belief that was like a valuable idea? Like, or what types of topics would you try to uncover?
So for context, what I was doing there was, my previous role as a chief of staff, and largely what matters is, can you synthesize information in a very quick way, and focusing on like just the most important points as well as like the takeaway. And there, I think what's interesting maybe with that I ran into there is like, just thinking about is like, why does someone actually pay attention to you? And I think the Axios model, at least in the world of early stage tech, I didn't find it was as interesting. And that essentially was trying to take like the smart brevity model to early stage tech. I think it's like, why does someone actually open? I think you need to have probably a really interesting topic. And in that case, I was trying to maybe take like the most interesting topic that was on the internet for that day and help give someone the talking points, that they could have in their exec meeting or with an investor or whatever. But I didn't think that was really interesting. I think what's interesting is, can you bring actually like a new idea to the table? I think that's what is actually respected in Silicon Valley. And can you get to, maybe can you show an insight a level deeper, and can you introduce a new concept? So I think there's 2 ways you can do this. I think you can do the Packy way, which has, you put in effort, and if you do great work, naturally you're going to get sort of just adopted by the masses, slowly, but then, quickly. Or you can focus on, can you actually do like maybe what now I think like maybe My First Million does, where it's actually, they'd still, before it was just focusing on like 2 dudes just, kicking it around, but now like they're going ham on getting like big name guests. And I think that's what people find really like, maybe the people who are not like these super active online people is focusing on is like, okay, cool. What does this person say about this topic? What does, for example, I think he just like, there was one I listened to about like Tony Robbins, it's like Tony Robbins talking about investing tips or something. I'm like, even at the surface, like Tony Robbins is an investing guy, but at least he has something interesting, probably because of his access or whatever. So if I was going to do it again, I think I'd probably lean into one of those two strategies. I think it's less so. I think if you're going to do like the industry dive model, like because what you want to do is you want to scale. I think the Packy model is less scalable, and it's like a lot of research, a lot of hard work. And it'd be maybe more so I'd lean into, cool, what does this person say? I think maybe I haven't looked at maybe how can you take the big guest model and apply it to a newsletter, but I think there's a lot of other people who sometimes do this in the investing world. They're like, they tweet about like, here's what Warren Buffett does, and then they link to a newsletter and there. But I think if I was going to do that again, I think either you have the Packy type model, you have the My First Million model, or I think there's actually a third path, which is you lean heavy into visuals. I think people in executives specifically, constantly internally, you have to prove your point. Like what's cool is maybe is like you have to, you're doing presentations and you trying to communicate your ideas very effectively. So there's a couple newsletters that have done this really well. Like Charter has done this well, Visual Capitalist. They essentially try and take what's this concept I'm trying to explain. Even CB Insights, they talk about it. And Erik and I were, kicking on some learnings from them. But he has this YouTube video, I think it's from like 2016. And they were talking about one of the quickest ways they grow is actually, can we just make a market maps get shit on, but market maps are very, tools that communicate things very effectively in a very quick period of time. So can you lean into visuals? I think would actually probably be the the third avenue. And that's actually what we're exploring right now with the current thing I'm working on is can you lean more into visuals? Because that's when you even look at, even if you just scroll through your feeds, like where does your attention go to? It's oftentimes like a great visual. Same thing like when we talk about with the newsletter, you 0.7 seconds to hook someone. Same thing like when you think about if you're trying to grow online. So I would probably lean more into like visual type of media. And whether that's a chart or you're explaining some sort of infographic or maybe you're just explaining some sort of concept or something.
And the goal from you for your newsletter, like the similar question you asked me, is it like build a relationship with a high value audience and like a strong customer relationship basically, or like what?
Yeah, I mean, I primarily view the newsletter as like just a free cash flow generating thing. Because I think it's like, what's the interesting thing is like at the end of the day, it's, why does someone maybe come to trust you or respect you? It's, we talked about like this personal monopolies flywheel. It's like at the end of the day, it's like you are the place where the insights are. And I sort of view, I lean more so maybe into the industry dive model where it's like, I actually think newsletters are sort of just like I've gotten maybe pessimistic on I'm very optimistic on the business value of newsletters, but I'm maybe pessimistic on like the actual utility from an individual level of newsletters. I think you can still make a good newsletter, but just the nature of the game is like, you're fighting for, where that 0.7 seconds type of thing. And I'm like, okay, I think maybe the game is more so, can you get someone to open it and just not unsubscribe from you? And get them to see the ad. I think that's like the simplest, maybe nihilistic interpretation of newsletters. But it's like, okay, if that's how I view the game, then it's better to just focus on, can I generate cash flow from newsletters and then use it to promote other parts of the business? Because I think what's really interesting with what Erik's doing or with, what I think you can do in a general intelligence business or CB Insights, I don't know why they don't actually use that as like you can make the next Atomic. I think that's what I think is really interesting is, can you use a media business to like sort of fund an incubations arm? I think that's actually really interesting. And that's sort of how I view it is, can I use maybe this as I think like executives are coming to you for something that they can learn or use in their job. but oftentimes what they're going to do is they're probably just going to click out, but can I spend money and resources into growth, maybe to get people to sign up with me, use it as a way to then, somehow drive them off the newsletter and click onto my other platforms and like into my podcasts or my TikToks or YouTubes or whatever you're trying to direct people to, and then just use it as a way to generate free cash flow. I think it's less so, I don't know if people like trust you or fall in love with you based on the newsletter. I think it's more so just on like, can you drive them to deeper types of experiences, such as like a podcast where they're spending, all that time with you in their ear or whatnot. So that's my current take on newsletters. I think it's primarily like just a financial engine than anything else.
Yeah.
And you can talk to a lot of people who succeed. They sort of just view it as like a math game. They view it less as like a, content game.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like it's the platform just saw, it's like oversaturation almost on like a platform, and then it started with the kind of like morning brews, and then even now the about a book Beehiiv and everything Substack, but
Yeah.
Email, as long as we don't see another like platform, like we saw a little bit with like Slack and Discord also creating like a new distribution mechanism, but I don't, it will come back. I feel like, or it'll continue. It's almost gotten to the point where, because now you have 50 newsletters right in your inbox. And I think why it's got to be like the high quality is just
algorithm for the inbox and actually feed you the most interesting emails or something.
It's a good, I like it.
But with that, I think the I view it as like, yes, what's like the minimum I can do to make it interesting and engaging. And I think one thing that we end up realizing, like we're actually focusing on like is the learning from Cleo Abram is actually from an operational perspective, can we focus on short form video? And then what's interesting with Cleo is like there's often at the core of a short form video is a visual, and you're already making the script for the short form video. And like what you can do is, can you just essentially repurpose the short form video as a newsletter? And given people are maybe spending 5 to 10 seconds anyway, like then maybe not invest all this time into making the newsletter per se. More so, can you take your insights from that you've generated from your podcast or in your case, the social group chat type of thing, communicate it on video? That makes a great, asset that you can hopefully do well on YouTube for growth, do well on LinkedIn, do well on Twitter, whatever, and then just repurpose that into a newsletter. And rather than focus on, you still need someone to manage and build these newsletters, whatnot, but instead of having a team of 10, 20 writers or whatever, you just actually maybe condense that into or allocate those resources differently.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of repurposing content just in general as well. It's just part of the like distribution arm and doing it well.
First Round Review back in the day used to do, interviews with people, and then they would create posts based on those interviews, and ghostwrite posts for them basically. And we effectively do that with podcasts, but we don't ghostwrite. But there is an interesting way of like borrowing other people's brands to like, here's what Biology said in the group chat or whatever it is, or here's what Biology thinks about this. And it's really just copying and pasting what he put in a group chat or said in a podcast. And I wonder how much
I personally think there's massive opportunity from a growth perspective in shorts. Like even just what we end up doing the study on, like, okay, what do people actually naturally pay attention to? Like, even though there may be at least at the top of funnel, what do people pay attention to? And often what hooks their attention, I find, is engaging short form video. And even if you look across YouTube, like where all the videos populated, you even look on a B2B side, like who's even doing it well. You can argue, I think there's like 3 buckets. You have you have like people who are maybe repurposing a podcast. So you have Acquired, you have Lenny, and they're working with the editor. I think Acquired is probably the one who has the most popularity now. But even then, like you can sort of tell it's not necessarily inherently engaging. You have the news services like Wall Street Journal. They do a pretty good job, but it's sort of like it's not necessarily native either. It doesn't feel personal. It's sort of like you can even just look at like their most popular shorts and you'll get the gist. Or then 3, you have YouTube native people. So you have like Clio. I think Clio, from an educational perspective, does it by far the best. From an entertainment perspective, you have like the smart nonsense guys. I was looking at Henry Belcaster's shorts, just absolutely crushes. Like you get in front of way more people. Naturally, it's also like he dumbs it down. His probably audience is like 12-year-olds or something. But even like Clio is still getting like 500,000 views, 1 million plus views on an educational type thing. And I think when we think about like industry diet, like I feel like the stuff that Clio makes is stuff that's like instantly, it's a higher cost to make per se. But engaging short form video, we're sort of allocating our chips to focus there to start. And I think you already have this type of information that either can be repurposed, or maybe you just take the clip you have on your podcast and you sort of do the Lenny style and, work with a, Philippines based video editor and actually make it engaging.
Yeah. I've seen people who even say like the point of the podcast is the clips or the social at this point. I think that depends on what your goal is. But I think some people have definitely done
what
that.
I think's cool with the Turpentine thing is like the Turpentine model is like, we're going to do a ton of podcasts, right? And like, we're going to put them like at the end of the day, like who would really love the podcast? It's like, it's people who probably actually pay for the podcast, right? Like it's investors, purchasers, decision makers, whatever. So I sort of view it as like, can you just get in front of as many of them as possible and then funnel them into like a paid product, whether a paid product or like highly sponsored by X company, there. So I think like what's interesting is maybe this sort of like barbell type of a place where you're putting your resources into it. I mean, maybe the percentage rates of what you're getting could be tough, but at least that's a way to funnel them into the newsletter, and like the breadth of the top of the funnel will be much larger.
I know you are a little jaded on like the vertical newsletter. You can pull a lot of like the great content and then try to find some of like the things that we were talking about to experiment with, like of whether it's like these panel ideas, the group chat, like trying to build that independence separate from the newsletter so that you have you are building something separate. But I think that there's worth from like a horizontal, just brand building perspective on that. And then, at the same time, figure out what vertical to attack next, which went back to the question when I asked you about healthcare, why you focused on healthcare, and how you chose that. But yeah, I think that was sort of the first.
I mean, I think there's a ton of value in newsletters. So I think maybe the jaded part is like, I think it's like, what is it the value trying to make the best newsletter in the world? I think that's sort of like, I personally view that as like maybe like a fool's errand, and like, let's just get to the best, the minimum we need to do where people actually look forward to opening our newsletter, type of thing. I think that's where I lie on the spectrum there. But I think there's a lot of value with what you're already having. And I think there's a lot of stuff you can do where even if you just put the podcast into like ChatGPT or Cubby app, or we started referencing that, and you just tell me the most interesting things. Or for example, say you were doing one on healthcare and you're like, I'm an executive at a Fortune 500 company that sells blank. Can you tell me the most interesting things of this podcast? I think you can feed it in there and it'll tell you something. And I think you can probably do this given you already have these assets published. You can make them valuable to people. And then, maybe use ChatGPT, like, cool, we have this insight, and like, can you like just edit the copy more so to make it engaging? And then maybe once you have this thing, you can have someone on Fiverr make you a visual if you want to make a visual, whatever. But I think you guys are in a great position. So even though I went on the different tangents that I've been on, but I think you are in a great position to make, solid newsletters. What you'll see in any of these markets you're playing in, there's actually just a dearth. Even like healthcare, one of the largest industries in the world. There's like statnews.com. There's like Fierce, there's like Becker's, there's Industry Dive, but there's no one who's doing it on a personal, engaging level, which you guys are primed to do.
That's a great place to close. And Anuj and Sarah, thanks so much for brainstorming with us, and excited to continue the conversations.
Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We produce the show you're listening to right now. We're also building a network product that is bringing together the best founders and executives in the game from all stages. The Turpentine Network is a high-trust space where exceptional people can talk. We already have over 400 members and growing. The community benefits include tactical advice, tech stack recs, hiring referrals, in-person events, an investor database, and exclusive perks. If you want to join, you can apply at the link in the description.